Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. And you would think if I'm getting the episode started that Richard would not be here. However, Richard, what's going on?
I'm here. We're just switching roles. You're just running the show. I think you've always looked good with leadership. The more empowered you are. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna let George do what he does best, which is lead the meetings. Actually, honestly, the other day I was thinking, George, like I remember sometime in the last year you were talking about how you've thought a lot about how to run efficient meetings, and I'm like, I
Oh,
need
yeah.
to pick your brain about that. And maybe there's a whole episode in that because there's lessons from the corporate world of meetings that I think dentists could probably use in their practice. But we're just having a meeting, George, and you're leading right now.
All right. Well, in our episode today, and I think for me, I want to make sure that everyone listening gets a ton of value. And so, in the episode today, what we're going to talk about is team leadership, creating infrastructure, putting systems in place, and empowering your team to have what we call team-led success. And so this is something that, for example, in the marketing department that I oversee, we're working on. And, I have a vice president who's very, involved in the leadership of the team. And we're working on what we call like team-led success, team-led growth. And I think it's an extremely relevant topic because dentists, I think early in their careers, are able to muscle their way to success. And, you do an extra good job presenting that treatment plan, or your team members aren't the best at putting things in place for you to be as efficient as possible, but you kind of fill in for their weaknesses. And, we call that doctors muscling the practice to success. And there's a shift that occurs, when that's kind of exhausting. And so there's a shift that occurs where you have team-led success, where you're more passive in your leadership and your team is the one really doing a lot of the muscling. And it's a lot easier because you can multiply yourself through other people and you can distribute that load amongst many. And so, what we want to talk about today is really this whole concept. And so, that's sort of my introduction. And so, Richard, maybe as our listener here, what types of questions do you think they're asking? Where should we really focus our time? And how can we really bring this concept to light?
Yeah, this is where I think every dentist wants their team to step up and lead, but I don't think they know what that means, the dentist, and your team definitely doesn't know what that means either. And so that's the hard part is you've probably not trained leaders. Most dentists have not only have they probably not even had leadership training themselves, they definitely haven't had training on how to train other leaders. And then your team members, same thing. They have not had training themselves. And so when you talk about you wanting them to lead, I think the more concrete you can be upfront about what that means to you, and therefore, what does this actually tactically look like? What does leadership look like? What are the expectations? What are the steps? The more clear everyone is, the more you're going to be able to do that. And also understanding where are the things that I shouldn't delegate leadership. I think that's the other important part too, is hey, I want you to go build structure and accountability around this thing that we're not doing right. That's not going to go well if you just hand that over to your team. Here's a Google Doc, create a system, bye. So I think that's the kind of question that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, so I think, we'll take that. I think the first thing I want to say is there's this saying, crawl, walk, run, that I use a lot. And in this example, crawling is having your team nail things that are repeatable, systematic, and done the same way every time. Walking is when there's slight variation to those tasks. And then running is where you're doing what Richard just said, right? Giving them complete autonomy to create a new structure. And it's you really should not run in right. What you're having your team do until you've crawled and walked. And so I want to start on crawling, which is, the most simple example I can think of is dental assistants setting up the operatory the correct way for each procedure to have optimal efficiency. And so, I think that Richard really touched on something that should be a big theme of the episode, clarity. Clarity is everything. And if you as a leader have not provided the proper clarity, then you, we talk about extreme ownership in that book by Jocko Willink, if you have not provided clarity to each of your team members on exactly what their roles and responsibilities are, how to execute that roles and responsibilities, what does good look like, and how do you measure their success, then you haven't done what you need to get good performance from your team. Because I think that, maybe a dentist listening is like, man, if my assistant just knew how to do it, it would be so much better. And so I want you to inverse that question. Say, have I been very clear on all the things that I expect of my assistant? Have I shown them very specific and clear examples of what does good look like? And have I showed them how I measure success? And have I provided all of that clarity to them so that if they don't do it, then there's no questions asked on whether or not you put them in a position to succeed. And I think that the most common mistake leaders make is they judge their team's performance before they put their team in a position to be successful. And I think that it's so easy to get frustrated with your team when they are not to me, it seems like reading your mind, but I think that the dentist listening might have the thought of shouldn't they know? Shouldn't they just know how we've done it so many different times? And it's that's a fair question, but I think that until you've provided ultra clarity to them, it's kind of hard to really point the finger at them before pointing it at yourself first.
Yeah, and I listened to a ton of Alex Hormozy on my most recent trip, and so I had a lot of drive time and commute time and airplane time, and he's talking to entrepreneurs who maybe haven't hired a lot of team members, they haven't scaled before, and you're talking about hiring VAs and hiring other team members. He talks about this idea of, and this is just to illustrate your point, one of the first things you should do is create a very detailed, kind of stupidly detailed checklist, step by step of how to get things done, and really emphasize to them, I want you to follow the checklist, even if you think that it might not be exactly right. And if they do something that's wrong according to their role, but it's on the checklist, you need to reinforce that and then come correct the checklist. So
wow.
what you're reinforcing is following of the checklist. And if something isn't clear, or if we're not getting the results, we need to go back and fix the checklist. But we need to reinforce this behavior of going back to the detailed instructions. And that's the kind of clarity that I think we don't put into roles in the first place. And that's just the actual role itself, not even leadership. That's just their job. And that's the place that we need to start if we haven't given them that.
I think two things that really come to mind when you say that. The first one is VAs. In this crawl, walk, run analogy, whatever is before crawl is VAs are offshore, out of the office. Virtual assistants are just inherently less capable. And I'm sorry if that sounds really tough, but they are inherently less capable than somebody in the office just because they miss all that contextual knowledge of what's happening being remote and often in a different country. So there's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier, there's a contextual barrier. So it's I think that the thing I would really encourage people to do is, I had a dentist ask me on a mastermind call somewhat recently, I want to grow into a group practice, but I'm currently in a solo practice where I'm just me and 5 team members. Yep. And what I told him is I said, well, you need that team to really be performing at a really strong level so that when you add new team members to them, that'll go much more smoothly. And so I think that, the thing I would want everybody to walk away from this episode thinking is, well, I really want to level up my team and, what they're doing now. The current team size you have, get maximum performance out of that team. And, if you need to add team members just organically, go ahead. But, I think people often think that they need to wait until they get to a specific size to start building infrastructure and getting more team-led success. And it's actually much easier. It takes time to get the team clicking and performing in this type of way. And so you really actually need to really focus on your team. And I want to talk about, so this episode's called Pathway to Team Leadership. And we are teaching a free course. So this is, at no charge. There's 2 courses, Pathway to Practice Management. That's the dentist version, dentist owner, and then Pathway to Team Leadership in the same facility in different rooms. And so what you need kind of first to really execute this is a second person, like an office manager or some type of, right-hand person to really help you get that team-led success. And so that Pathway to Team Leadership course is really for that second person. So if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking like, wow, I do want to start that process, a great kickoff point would be in September 19th, 20th. We're having this event in Scottsdale. Bring you and whoever is your right hand leader within the practice. Come there, learn, and then start to execute. But it really does require that kind of second leader within the team. And it sort of sets the tone for the fact that I'm delegating, I'm offloading, I'm empowering others, and then I'm leading. So I want to like kind of zoom in on that essential position. I think that this is like, unless you have an office manager, team-led success is going to be very challenging for you because you're going to create like this very horizontal structure where the dental assistant is coming to you, the hygienist is coming to you, the front office is coming to you. And if you're trying to get these people to grow and develop, you're going to have to invest a lot of time. And you need somebody who's really working with each of those individuals as their job. And so I really think that, kind of the first step where you're going from maybe crawling, like crawling is, does my assistant set up the room properly? Does my hygienist know how to fill out the co-diagnosis? Like, does my front office know how to answer the phones? Like, that's kind of crawling. Is like, does each team member know how to do their roles at a high level? And then the second step, walking, is getting that office manager in place and having team leadership that is not through you, the operator. And, I think that that's kind of where I think that there's like a big transition that a lot of people go to, and there's the circumventing of the new leadership and all the stuff that occurs. But that's like a really big step that is kind of your entrance into team-led success, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that makes me want to like see what the run is, and in my opinion, the run is then where, and you might have a different perspective on this. You've got an office manager who's making practice decisions without you there. Yes. And is hiring team members without you there, is training team leads without your input. Like, that is the level of what's possible of like, I technically, and past run would be where you have one meeting
let's not go past run.
Let's not go past run.
So I think here's how I would define it very simply, right? Crawling is, does each team member have very clear roles and responsibilities and clarity on how they measure success in their role, right? Like, every team member has their own, we do what we call scorecards in departments that I oversee. And, a scorecard in our world has like the 5 big objectives, the 5 KPIs that measure success, what does good look like, and like very clear roles and responsibilities. Then walk would be, I have a team leader, that's not me. And so you have everyone with clear roles and responsibilities, and then you also have somebody else holding them accountable to their roles and responsibilities. And then running is what we would call downstream decision-making. So it's like we've gotten so good at that leader leading the team members that we're then going to hire without the owner, we're going to train without the owner, we're going to onboard without the owner, and that's like running. And that's like, we call that a self-managing team. So you do running, I would call it downstream decision-making in the effort of a self-managing team. And like what running looks like, so we have this dentist in our mastermind, and he is looking to bring in, so he's working like 2 days, 3 days a week right now, and he wants to bring in a full-time partner into the practice, and then wants to like take a step back and have like a little clinical time, but really wants to transition into that absentee ownership perspective. And he was asking me like, how do I manage a practice without being there? And I'm like, well, you got to get to that self-managing team. And that's, you got to go through the crawl, walk, run. But then once you have that self-managing team, then it really does free up the owner to do a lot. And so I think the thing that I really just want to communicate very quickly is the practice comes with a burden of ownership. And you have a burden to make sure that the phone gets answered properly. You have a burden to make sure your expenses get paid. You have a burden to make sure that people are coming in and you have your team happy and properly staffed. And when you add infrastructure, it alleviates that burden onto the team. So the team is carrying the burden of ownership. And, so when you go through crawl, walk, run, then when the time you get to run, the team should be carrying the majority of the burden of ownership, and you should just be filling in. The hardest thing to do is creating new systems. That's like problem solving, creating new systems, like making very high level financial decisions. Yeah, marketing oversight, those types of things, like you really shouldn't be delegating them if you're at the mega group level or below. It's really about getting the day-to-day recurring and regular functions, going. And I think the good test that I would ask you about running is you would say, do you do anything that is recurring? Like, do you spend your time doing anything leading the practice that occurs on some regular frequency that is predictable and repeatable in the task? So like running payroll, doing the, associate, giving them their numbers, or looking at lab slips, like whatever you do that is like recurring, that's like kind of your sign that that's something that you can offload. So Richard, I feel like we've kind of gone through the crawl, walk, run. We've gone through the importance of clarity. We've talked about, how to measure success, what clarity looks like. So like what else very tangibly can we focus on for our audience so that they can, take this episode. Hopefully you bring your leader that second, when you go to crawl to walk, you're getting that office manager type position. Hopefully you guys are, wanting to come to the pathway to practice management, bring them to the pathway to team leadership to kick this off. But Richard, like anything else that you feel like we should spend our time on to really help our audience, connect the dots?
Yeah. So I think what we've just done is we painted the vision for the dentist.
Yeah.
Like the dentist can now see, okay, this is why, this is what it looks like, this is where I want to go. I think one of the next challenges is painting the vision for the team member, because why do they want to step up? Like, why do they want to lead? And with the smaller your practice, the less current opportunities for leadership there are. But if you're going to be growing, the more future opportunities
Yeah.
there are. And so there comes this like, hey, identifying of team members who do have a pathway to grow and to lead. And so we have to paint for them, okay, there is a time where we have team leads and we've got
Yeah.
an office manager. And the amazing part, hygiene is the one department where there's kind of like hygienist to team lead to possibly office manager if a hygienist wants to become an office manager. But the other roles,
I hate that route.
yeah, it is a thing. They can
It's
cover
a very
down your
common
hygiene.
thing. Yeah.
But to give your assistants and your front desk team members,
Yeah.
like, hey, there is like the more skills that you get, the more you're able to earn lifetime as a member of the team in a dental practice. And so if you're trained in the back and you're trained in the front and you've been a team lead and then eventually you're ready to be an office manager, you are in demand and you can get, we can provide more for you and have more opportunities for you. You can have more control. And helping team members see that vision of like, this can be a career, not just a
Yes.
position I'm filling right now. That is the part that we need to be able to paint that picture for people. Otherwise, they're not going to be motivated. They're just going to be annoyed that we're asking them to do extra stuff.
Yeah. So I think there's two things that are really important there. I think the first thing is people like autonomy naturally, right? So like there's like a human just desire to be autonomous at work. So I think that like there's a natural, like I remember when I first started having my assistants place composites, they're expanded function licensed in Arizona. And I was like, are they going to like, what are they going to think about doing all this extra like additional obligation that they're not used to doing and like no change in compensation? And they got a higher hourly rate, but and they loved it. They were all about it because from their perspective, they're like, wow, I get to do more than I normally do, and it makes their job more enjoyable. And so like when done well, it should elevate their experience of being more empowered to be more autonomous, to do more on their own. But again, requires proper structure. And then I think the second thing I want to talk about is pathway to growth, because that's the other thing that they need, is they need to feel that ability to grow within the company. So, people need to say, okay, it's growing and I'm growing with it. So then like I want it to grow because then I grow too. And I think that there's two mistakes people make. I think one mistake that they make is they don't paint the vision for this person's next role, right? So they don't say like, if you do these things and you do them well, this would situate you well to be a lead dental assistant or a lead hygienist, because you'll have built out a lot of the structures that we're going to be having the other assistants learn. So you're a natural person to teach them. The second thing so the first mistake is not communicating the pathway to growth for them in the position. The second mistake that people make is they paint it too far forward. So they'll
Yeah.
say, like, if you do this, you'll be the lead DA. And after you're the lead DA for a bit, then there's the next thing. It's like, you kind of don't want to extrapolate more than 6 to 12 months out. Like, you really don't want to. I like 6 months as like a good rule of thumb, is like, I really only talk about the adjacent possible over the next 6 months, because that's where we're going to get more focused on the day to day, which is really where I want to see the growth. And so, in the example of the assistant, lead assistant, an example of the hygienist, lead hygienist, and you only talk to one about this, right? Don't create a cultural problem in your office by telling multiple people that they can be the lead and pitting them against each other. And then, with your front desk office manager, right? But like, each role has a natural next ascension, and I wouldn't really talk about it after that. So for example, like, if you have a lead hygienist already, I wouldn't be talking about the next thing above that, because there's not a very concrete place, but there is a very concrete place into that lead position. And so, like, if I was a dentist, and like that dentist I told the story about earlier, they want a group practice in the future, and it's 2 assistants, 2 hygienists, 2 front desk. Then they might say, okay, well, I'm going to pick one lead of the hygienists and assistants, and I'm going to pick one office manager. And I'm going to sit down with each of these people, and I'm going to say, I think that you have potential. I would like to develop you into somebody who could move into this position, right? But you don't say, I'm going to move you into this position. You say, if you do the things that I'm giving you as additional responsibilities well, then that would position you very well for the next position. And so in the lead assistant, for example, that's the one we're talking about. I would say, look, we're going to add multiple assistants to this practice. My vision for the future is to have a second doctor. With a second doctor will come 2 more assistants. So there will be a total of 4, which means we're going to need to set up the rooms the same way. We're going to need to get much more organized about how we're thinking about supplies. We're going to need to have our lab process down. There's all these things that we need to work on right now in preparation for that next step. And so I see a lot of potential in you, and I would like to empower you to really work with me on creating this structure so that if done well, then you could be the leader of those assistants, and you would manage the hiring, onboarding, training. And, that's what's in it for you to help me build all of this infrastructure. And so you kind of adjacent possible. I'm not saying you got the role. I'm saying if you do this well, you'll be very eligible for the role. And then allow them the opportunity to show themselves, right? And they'll either sink or swim. They're either going to be like super impressive and you're going to see a greater sense of ownership, or there's going to be kind of a pullback and you're like, all right, this person doesn't have it. And then you give them feedback. You say, you just didn't have it. Like, I tried, I gave you this talk. I didn't see this. I didn't see that. This isn't what I'm looking for. And I think that's the thing that's really hard for people sometimes, is to give very direct feedback. But at the end of the day, like, it's kind of the lifeblood of somebody's development is giving feedback, to the point where when I have a direct report, I have 4 like vice president level direct reports, and I'm almost constantly giving them both positive and negative feedback, to the point where if you asked any of them, you said, what does George say you do well? They would tell you. And then say, what does George say you need to work on? They would also be able to tell you. And it's not like I wait for some annual quarterly review. I'm just doing it as it comes. When they give me something I'm not happy with, I tell them, right? So it's, if you establish this kind of open line of communication, then they will have a gut sense of where they're trending along the way. And if they want to course correct and improve, then they will. Right. So Richard, I think I went through a lot there, and I'm trying to make it very tangible for somebody so they can press start, listen to it, write down the script, and then kind of like go, follow that same type of format when talking to team members.
No, this was great. First off, you said one of my favorite terms, which is adjacent possible.
Yeah, I got that from you.
Okay, good. I was like, I love that word. It makes me think, we had some dental student interns back in the day where we were always like, what's going to be like the director level next thing. We were trying to keep them around because they were such good people. I think sometimes we're scared that we're going to lose talented people and we overpromise stuff in the future. So I love that you said, just focus on what's possible for them in the next 6 months. Don't promise them 2 positions. Don't paint the picture too far.
And make it contingent on their performance, right? Like, it's not, I'm not like, you're going to create this like nepotism, right? Where it's like, he told me I'm the special one, so now I'm the special one. It's like, no. You have the opportunity to be the special one, but you have to perform in a special way, right?
Well, and with that comes like more expectation. And so like it should be that they're more looking for feedback. And it shouldn't be when you hire the lead assistant that's not them is
Yeah.
when they find out they didn't get the position. They should be knowing all the way along the way, like you just
Yes.
said, areas of correction or improvement. And that's the kind of thing that we can be very clear and direct on, and they want it. Like, people want to know how they're doing. They don't want to be surprised. They don't want you talking to the office manager about their poor performance and you're not talking to them. They don't want you talking to your spouse and complaining about them but not sharing with them. And I've done the same thing where I've avoided giving criticism, but at the end of the day, when you're growing a company, this is a skill you have to have as a leader. So if you can't do this, how are you going to be able to teach them to do it in a compassionate, direct way to their team members, to the assistants they're leading, your lead assistant? If they don't know how to receive and they haven't had feedback modeled for them, they're not going to be able to do that, and therefore you're not going to be able to offload and delegate that in the future.
And so something I want to kind of talk about here. So I think sometimes you can turn a good team member rotten with kind of the approach that you're talking about. So it's like when somebody has been with you for a long time, that's either great or it can start to sour. Because imagine I hire somebody and I promise them too much, and then time passes and those promises don't materialize. You've now created that negative goodwill with that person,
Yep.
where they're now like, he told me this, it didn't happen. Now they're undervalued, underappreciated, and that's sort of like the beginning of the end. And so, frankly, I've had my own experience of this, where certain team members I almost was too lack of discipline with. And then as time went on, they became toxic culturally because I was not disciplined in managing their expectations along the way. And so it's like that might happen to you at times where you're like, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, oops, I said too much, And it's like, well, there's two ways that can go. You can course correct and you can try to remanage expectations and be transparent and kind and hope that you can recalibrate their expectations to be more realistic. Or you just have to accept the fact, and this is something I want everyone to be okay with. If you are running the business, everyone should be able to be replaceable. Like, period. And I know that that might be really like rude or kind of tough to hear for certain people, but truly, if let's just say you have this office manager, you depend on them immensely. They've been with you forever and you just promised them too much and their expectations have gotten out of line. They're starting to be a little toxic, but you're like, I can't lose this person. If you lost that person and replaced them, you will see that you will have iterated in that replacement. And after the dust has settled and that new replacement has had 6 to 12 months, you're probably going to be in a better spot than you were before. And I think that that's something that we've seen a lot. Like, you're scared of turnover of key man positions or, people that you feel are really impactful to your business. And then when they leave and you like create maybe like the next version of that position, you can hire for what you didn't like about them. And you also can like restart the expectations and get somebody, I've just found that when I've been scared of somebody leaving and they've left and there's always a little bit of a disruptive period when that happens, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be a little disruptive at first, but then afterwards, it's actually better than it was before. When done well, when you've iterated. And like, I remember my first associate left. I was like, oh, and then I hired somebody who all of the weaknesses of that first associate were replaced in the second associate. Second associate left. The third associate was like the things I liked about the first and the things I liked about the second without the things I didn't like about either, right? So it's like you can kind of iterate each time and learn the lessons from the past experience that didn't work. And so I think that, the purpose of this is to just let everyone know that if people leave or if you've gone too far in promising something, it's all okay. There'll be a disruptive period for a time, and then you'll be better off, most likely because of it.
This is one of, I think, the most stressful aspects for new practice owners and sometimes experienced practice owners, if you haven't experienced a lot of turnover, is this fear and feeling held hostage by key team members and knowing the pain of hiring and training. But if you can reframe this into what you just said, that no longer is your business being held hostage by one or two team members, by the fear of someone leaving. And in fact, you're just like, you know what? Okay, It'll be better. And guess what? Unless literally this person will bankrupt you by leaving, like your business will be okay. And for everyone, you're like, I couldn't lose this team member. Well, someone just started a dental office and they have no team members. So you have patients, you have these other team members. Yes, it'll get more stressful for a short period of time, but that uh, confidence that we will come out of the other side and to be able to say, actually, we're going to come out better means that you don't have to be scared of giving feedback. You don't have to be scared of toxic team members holding you hostage, which I think removes some of the major stressors of practice ownership.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, I bought my practice. It's coming up. It's literally probably 7 years ago by the time this was released. So it's 7 years, you know, that since I became the owner of that office, I acquired it. And in the 7 years, we've had 10 dentists. I had 2 hygienists. I grew the team to 4 or 5. All of them left and were replaced. I had assistants turned over. I had the front desk come and go. I have 2 positions that have stayed with me the whole time, a lead DA and an office manager, and everyone else has turned over multiple times even. And the office will have its best year ever this year. So, you know, you put that in perspective and it's like, you know, you just have to like, and I think that that's, you know, that's because of the infrastructure and the processes and the systems, right? And working on the business so that people can leave and others can replace. But that being said, I've also had my mix of team members that have been with me. You know, I mean, the lead DA and the office manager they're coming up on 30 years probably in that office, right? So it's like they've been there for quite a long time. So, you know, there's a mixed bag that I've dealt with, and the retentive team members are great. I really appreciate how loyal they've been and appreciate the long-term, you know, relationship that they've had with the practice. But also a lot of case studies show that like it doesn't have to happen that way and you'll be fine.
This is great. And I'm so glad we have this course coming up for team members in particular, because this creates opportunity. This is what it means to build a business,
Yeah.
rather than just have a job with a bunch of people supporting you in your job. If you've got 4 team members who, if any one of them quit, you know, they take the knowledge with them and they aren't leading, there's not systems, there's not infrastructure, then yeah, your business is held hostage by every single team member and you don't have a business. You've got a small team and a job.
Yeah.
And we want to help you build the biggest, healthiest version of your dental practice that isn't dependent on you to make all these decisions, to operate, to lead, and to manage.
We call it free. So we collect a deposit to make sure that you're not taking a seat that you don't intend on joining. And then when you walk in the room, you get the deposit back. So it's free. So the thing that I love about practice management and team leadership, so those are the 2 courses. So like, let's just say you want to bring your team member, right? You want to bring your office manager. So you would come to the practice management course and they would come to the team leadership course, which would be in the same facility. And, you know, what happens when you go to a course is you leave with so much information and so much awareness and so much to do. And then you go Monday morning to your team and you're like, oh, he went to a course. He's going to come back with a fire and let's just wait till the fire dies, right? That's kind of what happens. And so like the reason why we put them right next to each other is so that you and your sort of co-leader in the practice, that right-hand person, the office manager, you 2 can come together and you 2 can both have that energetic experience with a lot of information, a lot of infrastructure. Our coaches are going to be teaching the course and on the team leadership side. And then, you know, I'm going to be with our team on the practice management side with the doctors. And, you know, you guys will both get very relevant information to your roles, right? What you need to know as the owner dentist of the practice is very different than what your office manager needs to know, or whoever is leading the team on the team leadership side. And so each of you will get custom education for 14 hours of what you need. Then you both share notes, come back, and, you know, our hope and our goal is that there's a lot more traction that gets, you know, implemented because of that approach of involving the team. So I would highly encourage you to come sharedpractices.com, click on events, and go to Pathway to Practice Management and Pathway to Team Leadership. Register yourself for practice management, register your team member or team members for team leadership. And yeah, we're looking forward to having them there.
It's funny because I got to have the experience of bringing my office manager to our first version of this course a few years back. And despite knowing all these things And despite her being in the same office as me, there was still so much that both her and I took away from this. And it was all actionable. It was all concrete. And now she saw the vision. She had a plan. She had the resources. And it was just like, okay, what's the order we're going to implement these things and put them in place? So no matter how many podcasts you've listened to, no matter how many CE courses you've listened to as the dentist, you're the bottleneck. Like, your team will not understand what's in your head and what's possible and the exact steps that need to be done until they see it in front of their face. And this is the place to do it.
Yeah, so let's go through the pathway to team leadership one more time through the crawl, walk, run analogy that we've discussed, right? Crawl. Do each of my team members know what I expect of them? Do they know what good looks like? Have I been clear enough to put the burden of success on them instead of me needing to take extreme ownership to say, I haven't put the team in a position to be successful? That's crawling. Walking. Do I have a right-hand person who is leading without me and making sure that people are being held accountable and making sure that they know what good looks like and processes are in place and we've been clear with people and I have someone else enforcing that clarity? Then running. Do I have a process where decisions are being made without me in a structured and methodical way that make sure that the practice is more self-managing, right? So crawl, walk, run. That's kind of what we've been talking about today. And, if you feel like you have growth on one of those areas, like Pathway to Practice Management, Pathway to Team Leadership, September 19th and 20th, it's free. So, there's a lot of reasons to come. So, hopefully we see you there.